Buildings remember things people forget, not with longing or regret, but in the way their old structures hold the decisions made inside them, in the walls, the floors, the hidden systems, beneath everything that looks finished, permanent, and correct. Walter Mize had worked in Hargrove Memorial Hospital for 34 years. He knew the building the way some people know a language learned before they could speak it consciously. He didn't think about what he knew. He simply knew it, the way you know which step on a staircase creaks before your foot touches it. He was 61 years old. He wore the same gray uniform every day, kept his keys on a retractable clip at his hip, and carried a small black thermometer in his breast pocket alongside a mechanical pencil and that week's maintenance schedule folded in thirds. He had 4 months left before retirement. He wasn't counting the days in anticipation, like most do. He counted them with quiet dread, like a man approaching an unknown shore he isn't sure he wants to land on. Inside the hospital walls, Walter was an oracle. Outside, a man adrift, less certain of every step. He had started at Hargrove in 1991, brought in by Roy Castle, the senior facilities supervisor who had run the building's maintenance operation since 1973. Roy was 63 then, a slow-moving man with wide hands who paused before opening any door, as if listening for something on the other side. He trained Walter the way people used to train apprentices, by walking alongside him without explaining much and letting the understanding accumulate. Roy retired in 1994. Before he left, he handed Walter a binder of handwritten maintenance, records going back to the early 80s. And then he gave him one piece of advice. "This building talks," Roy said on his last day. His voice was soft, but the words echoed in Walter's mind for decades. Not loud, mind you, but it never stops. Your job, Walter, is to listen. Walter had thought it was the kind of thing an old man says because it sounds right. He understood later that Roy had meant it precisely, literally, and without any poetry in it at all. Every morning, the first thing Walter checked was his own journal, not the digital system management had installed in 2017, a composition notebook, one per year, going back to 1991. 33 of them on a shelf in a supply closet, each labeled in white paint pen on the spine. Roy's binder at the end of the row. He wrote in the current one every morning and every evening. Small things, temperature readings, unusual sounds, a door that had started sticking, a light that flickered twice before stabilizing. Things that were simply observations, because Roy had taught him. If you only write down what you understand, you stop seeing the things you haven't understood yet. The building, over 34 years, had rewarded the discipline. The hospital was built in stages across 3 decades. The original 1941 wing ran east to west along the main boulevard. 6 floors, brick facade, built to last a century and had. A second wing was added in 1962, a third in 1978. And then in 1987, the top floor of the original wing, the 6th floor, was closed. That was the part Walter had inherited without full explanation. The official record said the 6th floor had been decommissioned in 1987, originally the hospital's psychiatric observation ward. 12 rooms that operated from the building's opening through the mid-'80s. When the county built a dedicated mental health facility across town, the ward was emptied and converted into transitional administrative storage. A new 7th floor was built above it for administrative offices. The 6th floor officially ceased to exist. Walter had read the 1987 project file, his first year on the job. He had noticed, even then, that the renovation's electrical diagrams didn't match the older plans. In the original 1941 drawings, the 6th floor had its own electrical subpanel, a secondary distribution board in the northeast service corridor. In the 1987 drawings, that subpanel didn't appear, not removed, not relocated, not upgraded, simply absent, as if whoever drew the new plans had decided not to include what they couldn't find. He had flagged it in Roy's binder before the older man retired. Roy had looked at the note and said, "I've been wondering about that one for 9 years. And then Roy had gone into question with him, because nobody else knew to ask it. Walter had kept wondering, every November, with greater focus. The first year he noticed it, he had been on the 5th floor doing a routine check of the HVAC intake filters. The 5th floor, the administrative offices, had been built directly atop the closed sixth, which from below was the sixth and from above was the administrative level's basement. There was no access between them. The stairwells stopped at 5. The elevator buttons skipped from 5 to the roof. The sixth floor was sealed. He had been changing a filter in the northeast corner office when he noticed the floor beneath his feet felt subtly different, not warmer, in any way you'd call uncomfortable, just different. He crouched, held his thermometer to the baseboard, walked 15 feet down the hall, held it again, and went back. The difference was 2.3 degrees Celsius. He wrote it in his notebook that evening. November 14th, northeast corner, 5th floor. 2.3 degrees Celsius above ambient. No visible cause. He checked again the following week. Still 2.3 degrees. He checked in February. Normalized. In May. Normal. In August. Normal. And then the next November came, and there was again 2.3 degrees. He checked it every November for the next 11 years. Always there. Always November. Always the same corner. Always within 1/10 of a degree of 2.3. The building was saying something. In the same voice. In the same place. Every year. He filed 3 informal reports over those 11 years. The first went to the HVAC contractor, who found nothing. The second went to facilities manager, a man named Graham, who suggested seasonal thermal mass. The third, in 2008, went to a woman named Terry Vasquez, who arranged for a thermal imaging sweep of the 5th floor ceiling. The sweep found nothing unusual. Terry explained that the imaging company used equipment calibrated for surface detection, ceiling and walls. It could not reach through the floor itself to what might be happening in the sealed space beneath. Nobody thought to ask whether looking beneath the floor might be relevant. He knew the system. A fourth report, on the heels of a clean thermal sweep, would label him as another aging employee with unfounded concerns. He swallowed the warning, but didn't file the report. He kept taking the reading every November. He kept writing it down. The building kept offering the same information, quietly in the same place, like a message left on a door for someone who always arrived at the wrong time. But that was before the expansion project. The announcement came in March of the year Walter had 4 months left. The hospital's board had approved a major renovation of the 5th floor administrative offices, already overcrowded, with staff sharing cubicles and conference rooms repurposed as permanent workstations. A construction firm from Cincinnati had been contracted to double the floor's capacity. New server rooms, new document storage systems, new imaging archive hardware that weighed, per rack, approximately 400 kilograms. Heavy equipment, northeast quadrant. Walter read the project summary on the staff board, his gaze lingering. A familiar unease settled in his gut. He walked upstairs to the 5th floor, to the northeast corridor, and placed his hand against the baseboard. The silent warning in the walls was now screaming. It was April. The reading wouldn't return until November. But Walter wasn't there for the reading. He was there because 34 years of listening had given him a sense of when a building was about to be asked to do something it wasn't built to do. He pulled the 1987 renovation file from his supply closet, spread it beside Roy's binder, and looked at the electrical diagrams again. The 6th floor's original subpanel, the one that existed in 1941, the one absent from the 1987 drawings, would have been in the northeast service corridor of the seal level, directly beneath the northeast corner of the 5th floor administrative offices, where the floor ran warm every November. The connection was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. The next morning, Walter found Elena Voss knocking on her conference room door. He felt the weight of 34 years of silent observation pressing behind his knuckles. This wasn't just a report. This was an intervention, a crossing into territory he had long avoided. Elena was 38, organized, and had been on site for 3 weeks, setting up the pre-construction planning operation. He laid the 1987 renovation file on her table and walked her through the electrical diagrams. The original subpanel in the 1941 plans, its absence in the 1987 revision. He opened his notebook and read the November entries aloud, going back to 1997. The same corner, the same number, 23 years running. Elena listened, unblinking, not dismissive, no, but her calm was a barrier, "The thermal sweep from 2008 came back clean," she stated, a polite wall between his words and her concern. "It scanned the ceiling and walls of the 5th floor," Walter said. "It wasn't looking through the floor. The sealed level." "Yes." She looked at the 1941 drawings. She looked at his notebook. She looked at the 1987 file. "Our structural engineers are doing a full load-bearing assessment before we move anything in," she said. "I'll make sure they're aware." Walter thanked her. At the door, he stopped. "The server racks," he said. "The heavy ones. They're going in the northeast quadrant. That's the plan. That's the warm corner." She met his eyes. He held them for a moment, then nodded once and left. The structural assessment happened the following week. Walter heard about it afterward. The engineers had taken core samples from the floor slab, checked load distribution, assessed the column spacing. They had found the floor structurally sound for proposed equipment. Their report cleared the northeast quadrant for the server rack installation. It did not address the sealed 6th floor. It did not address the subpanel. It did not address the temperature reading. Walter read the summary Elena forwarded, the words "structurally sound" mocking him from the page. He sat, the report a flimsy shield against a truth he'd known for decades. He walked to his closet and pulled journal after journal. 1997, 1998, 2002, 2009, 2014. The same number, the same corner, in his own handwriting. Year after year, the building had been saying the same thing for a quarter century. The report said the floor was fine. Construction began in late May. Walter moved through his regular rounds and checked the northeast corridor every few days. Not because there was anything specific to check, because he had the habit of watching things that mattered. The heavy equipment began arriving in the 3rd week of June. The server racks came up on the freight elevator in sections, moved by a contractor crew with the easy confidence of people who had installed identical equipment in identical hospitals across the country. Every anchor bolt placed with certainty. Nobody checked the floor. The first rack went into the northeast quadrant on a Tuesday morning. Walter was on the 2nd floor when the building exhaled. A subtle shift in the air, a quality change in the hum of the hospital, the whisper of something cracked wide open. He had learned to notice these things. Roy had felt them too. He went upstairs. The rack was in place, anchored, humming. The crew was prepping the 2nd unit. Walter walked the far end of the northeast corridor, crouched near the baseboard, and pressed his thermometer against it. It was the 14th of June. The reading flashed, 4.7 degrees Celsius above ambient. It was an impossible number, a scream from a building that had finally found its voice. He stared, frozen. 23 years of unheeded warnings crashing down on him in the narrow corridor. 4.7. In June, 5 months before November, twice what it had ever been. He knew what the 1941 panel was doing beneath that floor. He knew what 400 kilograms of servers drawing continuous load above it would mean. There was no more time for waiting. He stood slowly. He went back downstairs, opened the current journal to that date, and wrote June 14th. Northeast corner, 5th floor, 4.7 degrees Celsius. First rack installed this morning. Reading arrived 5 months early. He underlined the last sentence. Twice. Then he called Elena Voss. She answered on the 2nd ring. He gave her the number, the date, the context. Every November for 23 years. The reading that had never moved. The reading that had just moved by more than 2 degrees in June. The structural report cleared the quadrant. She said after a moment. I know. The reading is 4.7. Walter said, his voice unwavering. It's never been above 2.4, even in November. And it's June. A longer silence than the first time. Let me talk to the engineers, she said. The engineers returned 2 days later with a ground-penetrating radar unit and scanned the northeast quadrant. Walter stood in the doorway without speaking. The radar operator finished his scan, looked at his screen, then looked at his colleague. Something passed between them, without words. They asked to speak with Elena privately. Walter went back downstairs and ate his lunch. 40 minutes later, Elena found him. Her face was grave, a printout in her hands. Walter, she began, her voice low, the radar found it. A void space. The original subpanel. Exactly where you said it would be. Still wired. The radar had found a service corridor beneath the floor slab, approximately 14 feet long, 4 feet wide, a 1941 utility access passage, and inside the void a large metallic mass. Dense. Stationary. The original subpanel. Still in place. Still wired. It had been connected to the building's original 1941 electrical distribution, partially absorbed into the 1987 system, with a sealed section left connected because disconnecting it would have required access nobody had provision to reach. For 37 years, a portion of the hospital's electrical load had been running through a panel no one knew existed. Inside a void no renovation acknowledged. Beneath a floor declared administratively non-existent. The heat signature was the panel running warm. In November, when the administrative load spiked, it ran warmer by exactly 2.3 degrees every year in the same corner. The building had been saying the same thing since before Walter arrived. He had been writing it down for 23 of those years. The server rack was moved the following morning. An electrical engineering firm came in within the week. Accessing the void required cutting through the floor slab and shoring the structure, a 2-week pause in the renovation. What they found was a 1941-era distribution panel running at approximately 340% of its rated capacity. Insulation on several feeder cables had degraded to bare copper. 2 breakers had been fused in a closed position by accumulated heat. Unable to trip, the panel had not been inspected or acknowledged since the building was first commissioned. The electrical engineer's report used the phrase significant fire risk, in language technically careful and precise, but which made unmistakably clear what would have happened when 400 kilograms of continuously operating server equipment began drawing sustained load through that floor. The 5th floor of Hargrove Memorial Hospital did not catch fire. Walter heard about the findings on a Thursday in his supply closet when Elena knocked. She came in, sat on the stool he kept for visitors, and set the engineer's summary on his workbench. She didn't speak at first. Her gaze went to a shelf of notebooks. 33 years of meticulous observation, labeled by year, a silent library beside Roy's faded binder. She looked at them the way people look at things they should have looked at sooner. "How long did you know?" she asked finally. Walter considered it carefully. "I knew the reading for 23 years, he said. "I knew what it might mean for about 4 months. And before that, I knew something was there. I didn't know what it was." She nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." After the thermal sweep in 2008, after the structural report cleared the quadrant, after I told you the engineers were on it, why did you keep checking? Walter thought about Roy standing at doors before opening them, about the way knowledge accumulated in a building if someone bothered to write it down. The question wasn't about thermometers, because the building didn't stop saying it, he said. She was quiet. Then she picked up Roy's binder and opened it. The handwriting changed from Roy's to Walter's at the page labeled 1991, and continued in Walter's hand for 33 years after. She closed it and set it back on the bench. "We like scanned copies," she said, "for the project documentation. With your permission." "These are the building's true history," Walter replied, a quiet finality in his voice. "They belong to the building itself, and should remain with it." She stood to leave and stopped at the door, the same way he had stopped at hers weeks before. "Your retirement," she said, "for months." "Yes." She seemed to consider something. "Is there someone who's going to keep the logs after you?" Elena asked. Walter thought of Priya, the young technician, careful and thorough, who had already sought him out twice with questions about unexplained observations. Small things she'd noticed that she couldn't explain and thought the history might help with. "There might be," Walter said, a quiet steadiness in his voice. October came. The hospital held a small gathering. The facility's director spoke. Elena spoke. Near the back, Priya stood with a fresh composition, notebook tucked on her arm. 3 weeks of her own entries already inside. A silent torch had been passed. There was a frame print on the table beside the cake. Walter picked it up. A copy of the original 1941 electrical diagram, the northeast subpanel, in its original position. Beside it, the entry from his 1997 journal. November 14th, northeast corner, 2.3 degrees Celsius above ambient. And June, 4.7 degrees Celsius. First rack installed this morning. Reading arrived 5 months early. Beneath both, documentation maintained by Walter Mize, 1991 to 2025, entered into the building's permanent records. He stood there with the frame in his hands, longer than was comfortable for the people watching him. He saw Roy in the binder, himself in the notebooks, Priya in the back of the room. A chain of observation that would now continue without him. Nobody said anything. Some things are allowed to take as long as they take. On his way out, he stopped in his supply closet one last time. He ran his hand along the spines of the notebooks. 33 of them. Roy's binder at the end. A continuous record from 1973 to today. He turned off the light. Behind him, the hospital continued doing what it always had. The walls held what they held. The systems ran what they ran. In the northeast corner of the 5th floor, where a server rack had been installed and then moved, and where the floor now sat quiet and properly wired for the first time in 37 years, the temperature read the same as the rest of the corridor. The building had said what it needed to say. Someone had listened. Even the buildings that talk the longest go quiet eventually when someone finally listens.